It's not nice to fool with Mother Nature. But what if we do? What if scientists could create cheaper food by making fish grow faster, by taking genes from one and putting them into another? Well, they have. Both of those fish are equally old, but the bigger one grew faster because it was genetically engineered to grow twice as fast. The promoters say this will help fight overfishing and starvation. The opponents say it's terrible. Some people call genetically engineered food Frankenfood.
They say biotechnology is dangerous to farmers, the environment, and the public.
It's destroying the crops. It's destroying the purity that nature has provided for us.
So are we destroying the purity nature provided for us? Yes, says Winona Howder from Food and Water Watch. No, says Greg Conko, author of The Frankenfood Myth. So, Winona, we're tampering with nature, and that's really bad?
Basically what you're doing is taking the genetic material from one species and splicing it into the permanent genetic material of another species.
You bet. We've done this with soybeans and crops for years.
We really don't know what the long-term consequences are of genetically engineering food. These crops that you mentioned have only been in our food system for 10 to 12 years. We don't know what will happen in the future.
Greg Conko, it does sound scary, or you're playing with genes.
Well, if you've eaten food any time in, say, the last 10,000 years, you've eaten something that farmers or plant breeders have intentionally modified at the genetic level. There's nothing particularly natural about the food. I mean,
crossbreeding and
crossbreeding, and in more recent centuries, many more sophisticated techniques of genetic manipulation. In fact,
but that's slower and more natural.
It may be more natural, but it doesn't make it safer. In fact, the modern biotechnology, which lets you identify exactly the changes that are made in the genetic structure of an organism, lets you know exactly what's going to happen, lets you test it, allows for much safer food.
You argue it makes it more precise. But Winona, I want to play this video your group made about the evils of genetically modified fish.
From the agency that brought you the largest egg recall in history, tainted peanut butter, and E. coli-infested spinach, it's the Frankenfish. Say goodbye to natural wild salmon and hello to dinner.
Craig?
It's ridiculous, though, that we're talking about this. In fact, I think it's worth noting that the spinach recall that the video talked about was involved in organic food. The fact of the matter is, these modern technologies allow us to be much more precise.
The spinach recall.
Actually, Greg, that's
organic
not true.
Food.
That the
Winona says that's not true.
The spinach recall was not an organic food. That was one of the largest recalls in the history of recalls in this country, and it was conventional spinach.
Look, you can go to the Food and Drug
California.
Administration website and find out about it.
What we're talking about is that the Food and Drug Administration is more of a lapdog than a watchdog.
And what are you worried about? Cancer, premature death? What's going to happen?
Well, in the future, we know that these traits could be passed on. For instance, the antibacterial
you mean I might grow twice as fast like the salmon?
What we don't know is what really happens in the future when you're messing with genetic material. What you're basically doing is making future generations guinea pigs.
Correct.
And what I
don't want to be a guinea pig.
This genetically engineered salmon was first created in 1989. It's been under review by the Food and Drug Administration for 10 years. There's no reasonable argument that it was invented 21 years ago. It was actually been reviewed. The Food and Drug Administration has been looking at the testing, the safety testing on this fish, both for human consumption and for the environment.
They're a bunch of bureaucrats. They're in the tank with
years.
We've found that the Fish and Wildlife Service has not been included in these discussions, and they're very concerned that these genetically engineered fish may end up in the ocean and could escape and cause wild populations to be affected. So there are a lot of
we're splitting hairs. The Fish and Wildlife Service hasn't been included, but the National Marine Fisheries Services has, as has the National Organization, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
They might escape. They're going to wreck all the wild salmon.
We've looked extensively at the potential environmental effects. One of the reasons why the Food and Drug Administration, at the environmental community's urging, is using a veterinary drug approach is because it triggers a mandatory environmental assessment. So that we've looked extensively at what would happen if these fish did escape into the wild. It turns out that they're much more interested in eating than they are in breeding, so the likelihood of passing on their genes to wild salmon is next to nothing.
You know, I think you have to look at what happens in the future, and you can't just look today. You have to look at what's going to happen 10, 15,
Okay, well, I don't
20,
think any of us really knows, but thank you, Winona Houter and Greg Conko. Next, you've probably seen the claims on the menu of your